Oh, I see we are recording. Thank you, Kay.
Yipper doodles.
The woman behind the curtain. Uh, Seeing a lot of people that we had yesterday. We had 27 total at one point yesterday, and we have 21 people right now. But it is 10 o'clock, and those of you that know me know that I like meetings to run on time. So,
I agree.
yeah, I think the only thing from yesterday is I apologize for not muting myself after I told everybody to mute themselves. It was perfect, really. Um, and I don't really have any other introductions, but Allison, we all really appreciated it. I
Oh,
really,
good.
honestly. And I think something that I really thought of yesterday is that we all do things a little bit differently. And this at least gives us a jumping off point to talk about things.
Yeah, I sort of kind of walked away from yesterday feeling like it would be possibly helpful for the in-training session that may be coming down the road, that it is sort of a best practices kind of sharing. So we do some groundwork before that to see what those best practices are. And they may not work for everyone, but that may be something that would be helpful for people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'll let you go here. And again, I'll be moderating. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And you can use your raise hand function if you would like to talk about your question a little bit more. So thanks, everybody.
So thank you, Heidi. And please interrupt me if the question is something that should be answered right away. So I did want to start out by just asking if there was anything that you thought of after training yesterday that you wished you would have asked that you didn't. I was kind of sitting in on the pre-chat, and it sounded like there was a question about the importing file utility. I don't know if you'd like me to address that. I think I have an answer for whoever it was that was asking that question.
Yeah,
It
might
was
as well
me.
address it.
Okay. So Teresa, let me know if this answers your question. So I don't want to go down a rabbit hole if it isn't relevant. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Let Heidi know if you can't see it. Again, what I am in is I'm in that company file that I mentioned yesterday. And one thing that I just want to mention, because it's open, yesterday I changed my preferences, my personal preferences, so that my reminders window would pop open when I opened up my company file. And this is just an example of what that looks like, right? If you have money to deposit, checks to print, invoices, sales receipts, bills to pay, those are the things that are outstanding in this company file. So that's what that looks like. So depending on how you're processing transactions, that can be helpful. Also, you'll notice I'm in the upper right-hand corner of my company file right now. And you see that little clock icon. That's a quick shortcut just to pop that reminders window open. So you can also add to-dos in QuickBooks. And I know that we try not to have too many lists in too many systems, but you can add a to-do at various levels in terms of records, customer records, vendor records. And so that would also pop up here. So if that's something that's helpful for you, that would also be in your reminders. So I think, Teresa, let me know if I'm answering the right question. So she's starting some new books and she's experienced in QuickBooks, and maybe the primary thing that you learned yesterday was that utility command that allowed us to import lists. And I think your question is, can you use that after you've already created a company file? And if you already, generally, we would already have entries in that company file. But if a list is blank, you certainly can use that utility to import, let's say, your vendor list. Another opportunity that you have, if you already have some entries there, you can also generate a list from your old company file. Let's say you can do a vendor list, you can report, you can export that into an Excel file. And tomorrow we'll talk about exporting reports into Excel. And then you can use the multiple entry list. And I showed that yesterday on the customer side, so I'll just show it on the vendor side today. And so you can actually map the columns that are in your Excel file that is going to look like a database file, a record file. And as long as you make sure the columns are the same as what you see in this multiple entry list. And remember, I showed you how to customize those columns. So it may be only certain pieces of information that you want to bring over for customers, vendors, or items. Again, there's certain lists that have this capability in Excel, or from Excel into the multiple entry list. And then it's simply a copy paste. So depending on how many entries you have in your new company file, it may cause those records not to have a good match on importing. But certainly you can always back up your company. You can import those, right? And see how that matching goes with any existing records you have. Or your other alternative is to do that copy paste from Excel using that multiple entry form, which is super handy. Did that help?
Thank you.
Oh,
Yep.
absolutely. That's amazing, the little things you show it on the screen, and I see your toggles buttons, and I'm like, I never knew. So
Yeah, that multiple entry list is something that's hard to stumble upon. It's kind of, if you're not looking for it, you don't see it, right? Just like so many things in applications, we get used to seeing what we're accustomed to using, and the other stuff just tends to be some noise. I did want to ask if the person who asked the question yesterday about, I have QuickBooks Premier and we didn't pick the nonprofit industry type when we originally started our file. I did send you, I sent through Heidi a response that I found online to that question. And I was wondering if that person has joined us today, if that worked, the help that I sent you.
I am here and I did use it and it worked flawlessly. Thank you so much.
Okay, great, great. I appreciate that, hearing that feedback. You know, you never know with internet help if it's spot on. There are always a number of answers, and I always like when you're doing Google search to answer your own questions, I always like to get that response from the end users that finally say, oh yeah, that option that you sent me worked. So that's always something to look for when you're doing Google searches to get help. Finally, one thing, and in terms of that conversation about best practices, one thing that Heidi, I'm sure you probably didn't get to it, but Heidi and I talked about this, was getting some conservation districts who are using that BARS chart of accounts. There was a little bit of a discussion yesterday that was helpful with reporting. And Heidi and I discussed a little bit about trying to get some examples of that, either in PDF format in terms of exporting a list and making it available to you all if you're interested in seeing that BARS chart of accounts. So I'm tagging you on this, Heidi. So hopefully that's something that will be coming down the road.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, so we are looking at your handout, unless there's anything else that somebody wants to bring up from yesterday.
Hey, Allison, there is one quick question about the nonprofit version being the best option for us as a small government entity. But maybe that's for a little later.
You know, the for example, since you gave it up yesterday, Heidi, I was using your file as sort of my example file. And, you know, your donations income account on your chart of accounts had quite a lot. You were getting donations for conferences. You were doing sales receipts for private donations. And so in terms of the chart of accounts, the nonprofit selection, whether you're picking that through Premier or you're selecting it as your industry type when you are setting up your books in just regular QuickBooks Pro, that's gonna, you know, add some things for you that on your chart of accounts that are applicable for donations and grants, and you're working with those. Now, those things aren't hard to set up in terms of just picking a general, you know, you could pick general as the industry type. So those industry types can be very detailed in terms of what is set up for you. Like a construction industry type is going to set up an items list that probably has 50 different items on it. Now, when you choose nonprofit, you certainly aren't going to have that many items added. And some of them that are added, you will never use, and you would just delete at the get-go. So that could be something in a future training session that we take a look at that basic setup for a general industry type and take a look at those accounts that are set up for you. It may be that if we have best practices and we have a chart of accounts file that is in an Excel format, as an example, that you can import into QuickBooks, you know, maybe that's going to be a better start for you because it's going to be more tweaked to be exactly for conservation districts, and it would save everybody time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thank you. I'll put that on a future list as well.
Right. So I think that gets back to, you know, that best practices conversation and maybe setting up a user group, people who maybe are new and people who have a lot of experience and maybe from different geographic areas, because that causes differences in how the conservation district does things. But I see that as a real positive in terms of moving forward and getting some standard best practices out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're all on board with that. Thank you.
Okay, super, great. Okay, well, let's get started here today. So I'm on page 12 in your handout. There is a header at the top that says session 2. Again, please chat, ask your questions, etc. So we're going to move forward and talk about your items list. And I'm just going to pop that open here. And some of these items are, you know, just kind of set up from Heidi's file. So I did that utility export and brought items into my training file. And some of them I've added personally. The items list is a list of things that you buy and sell. And in Heidi's district, she had, for example, some non-inventory items that she buys and she sells. She also had quite a bit of other charges. And for example, sorry to pick on you, Heidi, but do you see this DNRC book, Women in Ag book, is set up as an other charge. And I just want to talk a little bit about item types, because this is actually a thing, right? It's an actual book. And I probably would have set that up as a non-inventory part because it's actually a thing that you're selling. And so when we do item level reports in QuickBooks, those items are going to be sorted on reports by type. And so we'll see other charges together. We'll see non-inventory parts together when we do those kinds of sales by item reports. So that's the primary thing that you want to consider when you're setting your items up. Also, you'll notice service item. And we'll talk about volunteer time a little bit later. Some of you may be tracking that. And you can use your, even if you're not using payroll in QuickBooks, you can turn on time tracking so that you can use the timesheet. But the timesheets for tracking volunteer time, you have to have a service type of item in order to do that. So there's some tricks there we can talk about later if you're interested. And so your items list are things that you buy and you sell, and it's a many-to-one relationship to your chart of accounts. So for example, some landscape fabric, and you can see it is pointing to the sale of product income account on the chart of accounts, as well as this different kind of fabric, as well as beehives, some staples. I don't know what the differences between these two items, but those came from Heidi's file. So I added seeds as a non-inventory part type of item. So it's a many-to-one relationship. Remembering that, as we had discussed before, we want that chart of accounts to be more like a 50,000 foot level. You certainly could have on your chart of accounts sales of product, and then you could have sub accounts for certain categories of information if you felt you needed to do that. On reporting, you can expand and collapse detail. So just remember, the setup of this is going to be important for what you and your board or your treasurer, people you're reporting this data to, how they need to see it. What I'm showing you at the bottom of page 12 in your handout is I'm just showing you a quick screenshot. If I go to my item button, which is down in the bottom left-hand corner, you can also right click on an item to get to new. So this is your first decision point. Now, under edit preferences, I do not have inventory turned on. So I don't know if any of you are out there tracking inventory. Heidi did not have that turned on in her company file, so I kept it turned off in my training file. You can see as you turn to page 12, or excuse me, page 13 in your handout, you see a heading items type up at the top. And so I've given you a little word table that describes the items and what you would use those for. You can see service item, and you can see a little description right in QuickBooks. You can see non-inventory, and again, it'll pop up a description for you. So that's kind of a nice thing to look at. What I'm showing you at the bottom of page 13, and I'm just gonna cancel here, and I'm going to edit one of my items, and that's going to be my seed item. And what I'm going to do is just right click and edit that item. And what I want to show you here is a field that I have circled, and I have a little check mark in it this time. So this item is used in assemblies, or it is purchased for a specific customer job. So seeds are something that I buy from a company, and then I may resell those, or it could be landscape fabric, it could be beehives, right? Whatever it is that you may buy and then resell. So if I uncheck that, this particular inventory part named seeds is really only available for my use on the income side forms. So like invoices, if you're using those, or sales receipt forms, if you're using those. But when I pop that open, you can see that it allows me to both buy it and to sell it. And this is a conversation to have about best practices for your conservation districts. What I did was I pointed this to a cost of goods sold account, right? That's a cost of goods, and the cost of goods sold account is subtracted from your gross profit on a profit and loss report, right? So you get your net income, then your expenses are deducted, and then finally you see your net profit or loss on your P&L. So you could choose wherever you want to put that. I put it in cost of goods sold. If that is a different kind of expense, you know, it could be just a general conservation expense, possibly. So you pick and choose where you would want to put that. But I think it's nice to open up for those non-inventory parts. Inventory parts automatically open both sides up because you're tracking, right, how many you have. So you have to buy and sell them. So any comments or questions about that important little check mark area?
Don't have any in the chat box.
Okay. So the items list, remember, is going to be a real driver for you, in my opinion. And we'll go through some transaction processing shortly. And, you know, I'm going to be driving you to invoices and sales receipt forms because of the way they appear on your customer list. And of course, if you're buying things, you can either expense them or you can use your items tab, and we'll talk about the differences there. So I'm just turning to page 14, and up at the top of page 14 is a little discussion about how to different ways of getting revenue in, getting your income into QuickBooks. And depending on what your district does, you'll have different paths of how to get that in. So I first want to talk about entering an invoice. And I have an invoice entered, and I want to show you a couple different ways that you can look for it. So I showed this briefly yesterday. I'm just going to go, I'm right in the middle of my screen right now, and I'm going to go to my customer center, and I'm going to go to my local fire services. This was a specific example that came from Heidi's file. So you can see when I go to, if I'm tracking customers, I can find things by going to my customer center. This is showing me all transactions for this fiscal year, and that's all I have entered. But of course, here in this date parameter field, you're able to drill down to what you specifically want to see. Or of course, there's always, I want to see all transactions against this customer name. So I'm looking at this fiscal year, and I'm really just wanting to look at this particular invoice, the February 19th invoice. And when I double click on that to open it up, that opens up the actual invoice. And what you can see here is I've actually recorded a payment against that invoice, and I can see that it was paid. And this is a note to make if you don't know this. When we have history to a transaction, like this transaction has what QuickBooks calls history because it's been paid. And I can go here. So this is a handy little tab that's showing me some information that are quick links. So for example, I could go to a $200 payment on the 22nd. So I could quickly get to that payment by that quick link that's in my customer center. You know, sometimes this can get minimized, right? So that we're not necessarily seeing it. And so another way to get to history on all sorts of forms that you might be working with in QuickBooks is you can go to the edit command and go to transaction history and see how that's a keyboard shortcut that you might remember in terms of getting to that history. And so that just pops up a little window that shows you the history to transactions. So just a couple different shortcuts for you. And again, I can go to that payment and I can see where that invoice was paid. And I want to point something out to you on this form, and you can see it here in undeposit. You can see deposit to undeposited funds. So yesterday, when I went to edit preferences, I was showing you some preferences, and the default there is a check mark saying the default should be undeposited funds. And if that is checked, then you won't see this form. You won't see this field on this customer payment form. It will just automatically move to undeposited funds. Undeposited funds is it's a balance sheet type of an account, and it's just a holding account for you. So let's say you're doing a workshop and people are arriving and they're writing you checks for this workshop. Depending on how you process that, and there are different ways that you can do that. But if you needed to track it by name, you could actually put that directly onto a deposit form if that's how you're handling it. It looked like sometimes there was an invoice or a sales receipt form that was entered in Heidi's file. So if you're tracking it by name, you want to track those customer payments. They're giving you the cash right there. You could use the sales receipt form. So you have 15 checks for $15 and you group those together, right? And make one deposit at your bank after the workshop. So undeposited funds is a holding account. It's on your balance sheet. It's an asset type of account that allows you to group payments together. When I uncheck that preference, it allows me to be able to, on a customer payment, actually just skip the make deposit or the undeposited funds account and just put that money directly into my checking account. So depending on how you do your business, that's where we see that cropping up. Now, I just want to show you here. Do you see how I don't have that little shortcut here like I had at my customer record from my customer center? So I can go to edit transaction history here. And what I can see on this payment form is I can see the predecessor transaction, right? The first one, the invoice. The customer payment is in the middle. And then the third transaction in the history, sort of the successor, is the actual deposit. So transactions in QuickBooks are linked together like this, and your history will show you, and it will allow you then to actually go to whichever side you wanted to go to so that you can finally see the deposit. So you can see that this particular deposit went through undeposited funds. You can see that's the from account. And you can see I grouped those together. And what I also want to show you here, and I kind of forgot to mention this earlier, but I have made a mistake. We talked about class tracking yesterday. And do you see how this local fire services, I didn't put a class on my invoice, and I did that on purpose so that I can show you where that shows up on a profit and loss by class report. So I'm just going to close the deposit, close the payment, close the invoice. I'm closing the customer center. And I talked a little bit yesterday about sort of the yellow brick road to success. See these arrows? So if you choose to create an invoice, remember, that's going to create an accounts receivable record. So if you invoice, then you follow the arrows to receive payment. And then on receive payment, right, If you uncheck that preference that I showed you yesterday on receive payment, you either choose to put it in undeposited funds or directly deposit it into your checking account as an example. Or if you put it through undeposited funds, right, that last step is going to be to record the deposit. By putting a checking account in there right on receive payments, that just automatically will deposit it into that account. So you kind of get to sort of skip a step. So that's the process that we go through on the invoicing side. So I'm showing you at the bottom of page 14, I'm showing you that customer payment part of invoicing. And then on page 15, we're going to talk a little bit about using the sales receipt form. We'll get into customizing that template. And what I also want to talk about is using the sales receipt form versus using the deposit form. And we can
Just one
certainly
second,
have a little,
Allison. We
yeah.
have one question here.
Mhm.
In the customer center, is there a way to edit the columns that show up?
Do you mean these columns here?
It says, I would like to be able to see in the customer transaction if there is an attachment or not.
Okay, so in the actual, okay, so this attachment column that we see here, this is an attachment that's created at the customer level. So that's what that column is. So when I open up the actual transaction, that's when it would show me, I would click here and it would show me that there's an attachment. And so I guess what you're asking me is in this area, if you can modify that in order to see if there's an attachment. Is that true?
Yes, correct. I'm sorry. I was on mute.
Okay. You know, I hate to say no, but I think that's a pretty hard no. I guess that's the quickest way to actually see if there's an attachment. I certainly will put that on my list of research. On a right click, I didn't see that I could filter to attachments, but I could kind of get a shortcut by right clicking and go to, well, see, here's a customized columns capability. Let's see if we can do it. You know, I'm going to add a memo here. I don't see attachment. And I'll move it up after type. Oops. I just want to make sure that this would work. You can see I can't spell or type. I guess that would be a way that you could do it. So did that answer your question?
I think it answered Kay's. Yes, it answered her question.
So I guess what the learning moment is, because I just learned that when I did it. You know, a right click on anything is going to open up, right, information for you about what you can do. So there you have it. Always right click. I teach that in the basic Windows class. So that was fun. Thank you, whoever answered that question. I learned something new today. That's always great. Okay, so we are on page 15 in your handout, and this is a discussion about using sales receipts versus deposits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my customer center. And I know some of you mentioned yesterday that you don't even use the customer center. And so maybe this might be an idea for you that opens something up, maybe it would be helpful, or maybe it's just too much work. There are too many transactions and you don't need this information. But I have a customer, Sally Smith, and she does some different kinds of business with us. So she's a local, and she's really involved in a program which is called Community Garden for my particular district. And so what I can see when I use a customer name like this is I can see that I used a sales receipt form to enter some transactions for her. And so I'm just going to bring one of them up. Oh, great. Okay, so let's see if I can, I'm just gonna have to do some things here. Sorry about this. I'll blame QuickBooks. Has that ever happened to you?
Well, since we have a minute here, we did have a question that I was going to save until a little bit later, but is it okay if we just talk about it now, Allison?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. The question is, since we are largely one-person offices, so Chris from Lewis and Clark, would you like to ask this question?
Sure. Yeah, so since most of us are one-person offices, there's always the concern about checks and balances, and the person who's writing the checks, writing the invoices, writing the receipts is also the one paying the bills, taking the payments, making the deposits, typically. There are some checks and balances in place, but the supervisor who does our annual review on our books, she uses our hard copy receipt book that I use rather than the customer, the invoicing and accepting payments and doing the receipts through QuickBooks. She uses the hard copy receipt book to cross-check with the payments that we receive. She doesn't get into the QuickBooks program at the office, but she has me print some reports, and then I provide all the check stubs and backups and whatnot to her, as well as the receipt book. Is this a concern doing it this way, or is this all reflected on the reports in QuickBooks?
When you go through, I'm just going to call it an audit, right? Your books are being audited. The actual paper forms will always be important in terms of the cross-check. So let's say it is your supervisor is used to looking at a hard copy receipt book. Now, this sales receipt form is reportable by name in QuickBooks, as well as by item and by program. So in terms of the audit process and how your supervisor likes to do it, I mean, that may be something that we can't change because she doesn't want to rely on a sales receipt report, let's say in QuickBooks. However, by entering this in QuickBooks in this way allows you, if Sally Smith calls and asks you a question about one of her donations or one of her purchases of beehives or landscape or whatever it was, it allows you quick access to get to that because you're tracking it by her name. in QuickBooks. So I think that that's the win. I think that would be the win for you all, is what you get from reporting.
Thank you.
What do you think about that? I mean, say, oh, that's sounds right, or, you know, I'm not really on target with you yet on that.
No, I can see the value of that. If this is the format districts choose to use. I can just do a search on a person's name and see all of the payments they've made or the things I've sold to them by doing a search and report on their name. So again, like so many other things with QuickBooks, there's so many different ways to do it and have it work for you, I think. But that resolved my concern. So thanks.
Okay, so basically what we see here is it was a check for a certain workshop. And this sales receipt form
I'm
that
not
I'm
seeing your screen, Allison. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Is
Sorry.
everyone, yeah, I think.
Let me. Can you see it now?
Yes, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks for letting me know. So, so what we're looking at now is the sales receipt form. And so this particular sales receipt was in payment of a workshop. Let's say she prepays it and sends a check in, or whatever, however this money came in. And so what you can see here is, because we turn class tracking on under edit preferences, we looked at that yesterday. We looked at the class list, right? Lists, classes. We can see that we have a field available to us at the top. And this field, when you pick it at the top of the form, all the the item level transactions are tagged to that class. This particular deposit too, remember, that's opened so that you can make a direct deposit. That's where that check mark under edit preferences was taken off. So that opens up that same field I showed you before here. We're going to talk a little bit about templates. So we have invoice templates, sales receipt templates. Those are probably the ones that you'll use. You know, they're packing slips and POs, you know, a lot of stuff that you guys won't use. I created a custom template form called the classes sales receipt, because the default sales receipt doesn't have a column down here for classes. So it may be that you get a grant, and maybe most of that grant goes to a specific program. Let's say it's to a specific workshop. But it could be that part of that grant you want to put to an administrative class, because part of that is going to cover the cost, your cost of putting that program together. It's sort of like an administrative fee that gets carved off of that grant to help pay for your district's expenses, not direct expenses, but sort of the soft expenses in terms of what it takes for you to put that program on. And so there may be donations that you need to divide into different classes. So that's why we'll need to open that up. So you'll see here that we see the class listed also in the column, because that's a repeat from up here, even though there's only one line. And so what I want to talk about, what can be confusing to people, And I think it was Chris who mentioned before that when she wants to find something, she just goes in by customer name. And so it can be confusing for people if you are using the customer center. It can be confusing because you may not see a transaction because of the form that you used to enter that transaction. And my example here today is going to be a find. I'm going to do a find because let's say this person called and she said, she has a question about a $500 transaction and you can't see it here on your customer record. And so what I'm going to do is, again, go to Edit, Find. And I do want to point out that this Find feature has simple finds that are by transaction. So you can narrow the search results by transaction type. But there's also an advanced find here. And that allows you to kind of do that drill down or filter on a lot of different levels here. And so I'm just going to say I want to find it by an amount equal to $500. And so what I see there is I can see a $500 deposit and I can see the name Sally Smith on that deposit. And I could say I want to go to that actual deposit form. And so this is an option for you, right? You see, I have filled in the name received from Sally Smith. The from account is just, I'm putting it right into a sales of product. I'm not choosing to use items. I can see that I can put the check and the amount in there. It was sale of products, so I'm just going to put that into my administrative class. And I'm going to close. So for those of you who are using a customer list, and let's say you are invoicing, and if you enter your transactions in different ways, it may be confusing to you because even though you have the name here on your make deposit form, it's not showing up in your customer center. So if you want to use the customer center to drive information about what you're getting for your customer, you'll want to have consistency there. You'll want to do an invoice for the income or a sales receipt for the income. Does that make sense? Let's say we do an edit and we do a find. And I'm going to go to the Advanced tab, and I'm going to do it by name. And I'm going to say, I want to find transactions by that name. So you can see there that I can find that deposit just by looking by name. That's what someone else was saying earlier today. I just look by name. And that can be confusing to people again, because remember, this customer center is sort of driven, what you see there is driven by what we see here. You can see that customer center doesn't pick up that deposit that is hanging out over there. So as long as you understand what you're looking at, it's fine to do it the way that meets your requirements for tracking. So what I want to do is I just want to dive into a little bit on how we customize the template forms that we use. And then I'll show a little bit more of sales receipt forms. So when we're in a form, like a create invoice form, see how we have a template field that we can use, and QuickBooks will remember the last template that you used on a form. Same thing that we see here with a sales receipt, right? A template that we may want to use. So I have a couple different ones for sales receipts. I have one that is for donations specifically. So I've changed that word from sales receipt to donation. We do that through customizing templates. And I also have just a sales receipt form that has a multiple column for classes. So there are lots of reasons why we customize our template forms in QuickBooks. So I'm going to go to my list command on the menu bar, and that's where I'm going to find my templates list. And so you can see that I have a customized template called Classes Sales Receipt, and I have a donation sales receipt here in my list. If I want to create a new template, just like most things, I can right click, or I can go down to my templates button and I can click new. So these are the templates that you have control over in QuickBooks. So you can see that because I don't have purchase orders turned on under edit preferences, that's ghosted out for me here. Probably you don't have it turned on either, I would guess. I'm going to go to the sales receipt form and I'm going to click OK. So that's actually what I'm showing you at the bottom of page 15 in your handout. And then as we turn in your handout to page 16, so basically I'm in the first screen of customization. And you can see that what QuickBooks does is it just basically copies the standard sales receipt form into a named form called a copy of new sales receipt template. And the first thing you want to do is click this Manage Templates button, because that allows you to rename this to some name that you can actually understand. So I'm just going to call this Training Example, sales receipt. I got to move a couple things around here. And then I'm down at the bottom and I'm going to click OK. So that's really kind of the first thing that you want to do so that you can easily pick from the list of templates. So the first basic customization screen is where we can select different colors. If you wanted to add a logo to a sales receipt form, what kind of information do you want to include, a phone number and email address on that kind of stuff. That's pulling from your company information tab that is located back in QuickBooks. And then basically there are two areas of customization that we look to: additional customization and the layout designer. When this kind of information is really kind of up here at the top on your form. When I go to additional customization, that opens up other fields that I can change. So for example, if you wanted to use a different title on your sales receipt form, like I showed you, I had donation, this is where you would put your new title. If you don't want to see the sale number or have the sale number print because that's not meaningful information, you can say, I don't want to see that on the screen. Now, these prompts that you get, use the layout designer to reposition overlapping fields. That's this other button down here at the bottom. So you go through basic customization for sort of header information on a form. Additional customization is where I can change some of the other header things, like the name of the form, what I want to see. The layout designer is where I want it to be on the form. So I'm just going to say, do not display this in the future or it will drive us all nuts. And I would recommend that you do that too. And so this is where we pick and choose what we want to see in this other header area. And you'll notice there's a columns tab here. And so this is what I was saying in this columns area where I'm moving my mouse. This is where I said I want to see class on the screen, and I want class either to print or not, right? And class is going to be equivalent to the programs you're tracking. Lastly, in the footer area, this is what I alluded to yesterday. If you do have, let's say this is a donation form you're adding, you can actually add to print. Again, we have overlapping fields, and that's when I would go to my layout designer. But this is where I could add long text if on a donation. This could be the form that you send them for their tax records. And so you could put the information there that they would need. So anything that you want to repeat that is long text, you could put in that field. So that is what I'm showing you, sort of different pieces of this additional customization. And the last step in designing templates is going to the layout designer. And that is the screenshot that I'm showing you on page 16. And so this green area is for double windowed envelope, but I'll just, for example, do some just quick things. In the layout designer, I could move the name of the form down. I could say that I want the date to the label for the date to be there, and I want the date to be beside it. I could say in my column area of my form, I mean, this really goes on forever. So I could say, you know, that's really too long. I never really have that many items. I want to shorten that up. I want to make my columns wider or narrower, I mean, whatever. And you could, for example, go to properties of some of these different fields and change the word, the description, the border, the color fill, blah, blah, blah. So it's really endless in terms of what you can do to manage these forms. What I'm going to do is click OK. I'll click OK again. Click OK again. And you'll see that I have my training example sales receipt there. So if I just quickly go into my donation sales receipt and edit that template, I can go to additional customization. You can see how basically I just changed the name on the form, as I mentioned earlier. So what I'm going to do is cancel. And I will close out of my template list. Again, that was on the list command on the menu bar. And before we move to the next page, I just want to show a little bit more about sales receipts and just some examples that I have in this company file. So I'm just clicking the back button. And so what you'll notice here is I'm also using the sales receipt for an in-kind donation. So Sally actually bought a bunch of seeds from us for the community garden, and she donated some of those back. And I'm using a sales receipt form for that again. And you can see on my items list, and I'll just click the down arrow. So if you have in-kind contributions from people that are different things that you want to track, you can do that through different sub-items so that you get a report on what the donations were, right? What type of donations they were, rather than just a lump sum that you see in an income account. You can see that I have an offset item set up. Didn't actually want to pick that. So it's an in-kind donations of seed. And then the item underneath it is just the offset to that, because we want this sales receipt finally to be a zero amount. So what I need to do is either revert this form. This is a nice little button down here just to revert it so that it's what it originally was if you kind of mess around with it like I just did. And so the goal here is to make sure that we have the plus in of the in-kind donation and then the subtraction out. So it's actually a zero amount. By using this form, I'm tracking it by name and I'm tracking it by class. And so what I'm going to do is just close out of that sales form. And I just want to show a couple other ideas here. So this is, I didn't know really what this name was, but an Intermediate West joint venture customer that came from Heidi's list. And what I did was I just entered it as an item. It's a federal grant income in my little training company file. And I just said this went to an admin class. So this was unrestricted grant funds that the district is just using for those overhead kinds of costs. You can see here, I'm just using my classes template for this. I could have changed the name if I wanted to. I'm using my back button just to show you some different ideas. So this was another idea in terms of a sales receipt to get revenue in. So I created a customer job just called workshop attendees. Let's say I have, 100 people coming to a workshop and I don't want to really track individual customer names. What I did was I created a name workshop attendees. I did a class specific to the workshop program. Again, I'm just using the item so I can track that at the item level for what it was that I sold and the total amount that I received that day. So I showed you an example of specifically tracking maybe a fee that you get from a customer for some program. So Sally Smith was $15, but it may be that you just want to group those together because you don't want to track individually. So the difference is you could just put that in as a deposit form, right? You could just deposit it against workshop income. You could put the class there, but you wouldn't have item level tracking in terms of what it was that you sold. So if this item level concept is resonating with you, you want to think it through. So I guess whenever you want to bypass forms and go directly to make deposits because you want to skip the steps, that may be a viable option, right? Because I could do that on the deposit form also. So if you have questions about that, let me know. I'm pushing you toward the sales receipt form because of item level tracking. It just gives you more detail than what you would get if you put it against workshop income on a deposit, right? If you're tracking it by class and you have class tracking for different workshops, that may be enough detail for you. This is just another example. This is a donation. This is from the DNRC. This is an example of using a customer that is a grantor, and you can see the sub job under it is the name of the grant, and I just used year numbers for those grants. This particular grant, you can see I'm using donation to get that donation name on my sales receipt. You can see that I have on that template, I customized it so that class was in the column so that I can split that. Notice the item level report that I could get on this also. And I can split that between workshops that grant was for, as well as maybe that administrative fee, or if I needed to split the funds into multiple programs. Any questions about that? or thoughts, comments? Okay, so I'm on page 17 now, and what I'm going through here is the process, right? If you create an invoice, you receive payment, and then you can see on this record deposit icon, there's a little red number there. And what I want to do is just quickly go to the chart of accounts lists, chart of accounts, or other shortcuts that you know of. And what we see here is undeposited funds. So I see that there's $400 sitting there waiting for me to deposit that money. Of course, on the chart of accounts, we see our asset accounts that will be reported on our balance sheet. So if I went to reports, company and financial, balance sheet standard, I'm going to also see undeposited funds there. I'm going to close my balance sheet report. So when I go to record deposits, so it's a $400 payment from the local fire services customer that's just sitting there. And so this would be where you would group things together. Now, this is all types grouped together, but if you are receiving credit card payments from people or other online payment sources, you know, if you're using an online service like Square or something to get payments from people for workshops and attendance, you could have those types of payments there too. What I'm going to do is select that payment. And I'm going to click OK. That copies everything into my deposit form. I want to make sure I get that into the right account. And then I'm going to click Save and Close. I'm going to fix some of those class errors, right? If you do class tracking, you're going to want to class all your transactions so that that unclassified column on a profit and loss by class report will be your mistakes, or I just don't know where to put it. So I have a screenshot for that of that make deposit or the undeposited funds window for you at the top of page 17. And as we look down at page 17, that just shows you the make deposits form. And I showed you that deposit earlier where there were multiple payments that I grouped together with undeposited funds and deposited them together. That's going to make reconciling your checkbook a whole lot easier. So that's kind of the accounts receivable side that I was going to show you. And I'm going to move now on page 18 to the accounts payable side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to vendors. And I'm going to go to DoubleTree. So just like I showed you sort of on the accounts receivable side, if you're looking for something, you could go to your vendor center, right? And you could see by going to the vendor name, you could see a bill that is entered for that vendor. So I can double click to get into that bill. So a couple things that I just want to say here. Sometimes you'll use this, right? Because DoubleTree has sent you a bill for this conference and you don't have to pay it for a while, right? There's some terms on the bill, so you're going to wait to pay it until it's required. That's why reminders are your friend, because those reminders will help you remember, right, when you need to pay this bill. So I have a bill here that I previously entered for DoubleTree. And what you can see here is I'm putting this against workshop expenses. It was for $650. I can tag it with a grantor and a grant name. Yesterday, I showed you how to go to edit preferences to take this billable check mark off because you won't be using that. That's something that contractors use with QuickBooks Pro. And then of course, I'm going to class that. So by creating a bill like this, that's going to create the accounts payable record. So if I did a report, a balance sheet report, I'm going to see an accounts payable liability. And I have more than one, right? And of course, we can go to that amount and we can drill down and we can see what other bills are out there that I need to pay. So when we enter a bill, again, these transactions get linked, right? When we see those arrows, just like that transaction history. So we have to go to pay bill in order to clear that accounts payable record. I have a little, I don't really have screenshots of these forms for you. I just have a little description at the top of page 18. So I'm going to go to pay bill. If you check more than one bill to pay, then you would be able to print checks out, right? The checks go by name in this vendor area. I'm going to click DoubleTree. This is the bill that I want to pay. If you had any credits against that vendor, it would show here. This is where you would pick your payment method, whether it's via check or credit card. I'm down at the bottom of this window. I'm just going to pick checking account, and this is the only bill I'm going to pay. I'm just going to say I'm done, right? I'm done with this particular process. So you enter the bill, then you pay it. And when I go to reports, company and financial, balance sheet standard, you can see that my accounts payable has been reduced. So some of you really have a lot of experience in QuickBooks. For those of you that this may be newer, Heidi mentioned to me, some of you may have only been doing this for 3 weeks. And if you haven't done bookkeeping before, it's a really good idea to do what I just did. Kind of do reporting before and after so that you get a feel for the entries that forms are making on your chart of accounts and an understanding, again, of for your district, the profit and loss and the balance sheet report from an organizational perspective. You know, we don't always enter bills because that isn't what happens. We don't get an invoice in the mail that becomes our bill. So very oftentimes we may want to just use the right check form to pay for those bills. And so I have a screenshot of that for you on page 18. You can either use this form to write a check to pay for something, or you can just enter it directly into your register. So I'm just showing you, even in this form, you're going to see bill payments, right? Because it came out of your checking account, as well as you'll see that in your register. So here's an example of a check that I wrote, and it's to, again, a ranch where we went to have some kind of workshop. And so what we can see here is I'm expensing that to workshop expenses and amount. Memos can always be your friend too. If it's associated to a grant and you want to report that based on grant name, you can put that in. And then I'm also putting the class in for that program cost. So certainly using the check form is something, if you like it, even if you're not printing checks out of QuickBooks, that can be a nice entry form for you. Another way that we enter expenses is we put those right into the register. And so I clicked just the shortcut to get into a check register, and I'm going to click OK. So this is just the register view that we see here. You can see different types of transactions here as you're using different forms. So you can see whether it's a bill payment, or you can see whether it's a check, And what I would like to point out is in the middle of page 18 in your handout, if you attempt to write a check to a vendor that has a bill opened, you'll get an edit on that from QuickBooks. All right. So just be aware of that. I'm showing you what that edit is. That's sort of to remind you that you need to use pay bills if that is in fact the bill you're paying. If you're paying that same vendor for something else, then you just continue with writing a check. You click that button that I'm showing you in the middle of page 18. So if you are using the check register for entry, that might be the fastest form that you have. So it may be that you have set up auto pay. So you have auto transactions, you know, for insurance or to pay utilities. They're just debited automatically out of your checking account. And so the check register may be your quickest way of entering those. It may be that you're downloading transactions from your bank. We talked about that QBO format yesterday. And so you may be doing that bank feed kind of a selection and matching of transactions to get those transactions into your register. If you are entering transactions manually in your register, remember you're going to be using class tracking, and you'll notice here that you don't have that ability to enter class. And so if you click the splits button, that opens up a form that actually has the class column there for you. So a split transaction is when you're making a payment. Let's say you have a vendor that you're buying not only seeds but landscape fabric from, and you're tracking that in 2 different accounts. That would be split, right? Or you go to Costco and you're buying office supplies as well as workshop materials. You may be tracking that separately, and that would be the split transaction that we're talking about here. So remember to open that up so that you're classing your transactions if you're using the register. Again, what I like to teach people to do in QuickBooks is we use the right forms that actually match the process that you went through, right? So if you go to Costco, you're never going to get a bill from them. You may get a credit card bill, which we'll talk about momentarily. But if you just simply write a check, then you're going to follow that same process. Okay, we're going to turn to page 19. And we're going to talk a little bit about credit card payments as well as petty cash. So first I want to refer back to my chart of accounts list. And what I want to take a look at here is you see that I do have a Glacier Bank Visa credit card type of an account for my training district that I set up. So when you have that set up, that type of an account, then what you'll see on your home page is you will see the Enter Credit Card Charges button. So people handle credit card payments differently, and I'm not sure what you do on your districts, but especially if you're not paying credit card balances off in full, this Enter Credit Card Charges form will increase the liability that you have in that credit card for that credit card account as you're charging things in that month cycle. And then that will also show on your balance sheet. So if you're reporting balances to supervisors, to treasurers, to board members, that's going to make your balance sheet accurate, right? Because that's going to be a liability that's going to show on that report. I'm just running a quick balance sheet standard. And what I can see is under my liabilities, I can see that I have an outstanding $100 that I need to pay against that credit card. Again, it's how important it is for you. The other thing that I want to point out on your enter bill form as well as your credit card form, you can either expense things or you can buy at the item level. So if that detail of item level reporting is important to you, you're going to want to buy the item seeds. And I showed that on your items list form, right? You put that little check mark in at the item level, and that allows you to buy it and it allows you to sell it on those forms. So I'm showing you an example on the bills that we paid. We put those to workshop expenses, right? We use the expenses tab for that. This is an example of using my credit card, and I'm actually buying items with that credit card. Again, I want to be careful to make sure I'm classing that so it goes to the right program that I'm buying things for. So credit card purchases accrue over the month and then you pay them. And if you use this form, then you will also be reconciling your credit card just like you would reconcile your bank. And when you go through that process, QuickBooks will give you the option to go ahead and make a payment against that credit card. So this is really detailing at the receipt level, which may be good for the audits that you go through. Sort of like the discussion earlier, the supervisor looking at the specific, sales receipt book. This will give you by the account a detailed listing in QuickBooks of the charges by that account. And so if that's something that can align right up to your sales receipts. Some people don't choose to do that. Some people choose because they pay their credit card off. And this may be an important item for discussion because maybe because of the audits you go through, you shouldn't do this. But some people just write a check to the vendor, right? They'll just write a check out of their checking account, or they use splits here, right? You could open this up and split the transaction. And they, if possible, depending on class, they just group things together, right? Like if they're travel expenses, they might just group that together, even though there may be 5 line items on your credit card statement. They may just group it together and assign it to an expense account here. And maybe that's an admin kind of class. Other charges might be for, I don't know, you put utilities on your credit card. And again, that might be class to admin over here. You may have to do sort of multiple splits in the same expense account because there's one expense for workshops, but it's 2 different classes because it's 2 different workshops that end up being on the same credit card. So some people who pay their credit card off in full every month choose to use this process because they don't want to put the detail in. But they can still get it expensed right, and it can go to the correct classes. So I'm not sure if we want to have a discussion about those 2 different credit card methods, or if
A lot of us
that's
aren't able to use credit cards, Allison. Oh, here, we have a question from Julie. Do you attach the credit card to a bank account for when you go to pay the credit card bill? Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So when you pay, depending on how you're doing it, if you're going through enter credit card charges, you can go through banking and through pick the wrong transaction, through banking and through reconciling of transactions. And you can reconcile your credit card. So that's when you get your statement, right? And you would be able to check off, let's see, I'll just put $500 here. Just like your checking account statement, you would be checking off your charges and any payments that were made in the prior month. And when you click reconcile now, QuickBooks will ask you, do you want to pay for that now? Do you want to pay your ending balance, right? What you owe? And then you would pick whatever checking account you want to pay. And that will clear the liability out of that credit card for that amount. If you're simply writing a check, let's say, yeah, you would pick the checking account here. And then if you were writing a check to the vendor, like this credit card vendor, you would put the amount here, and then you would put the detailed expenses and or items that you were paying for.
Did that help answer that question, Julie?
So I guess what I'm confused about is if you go and pay your credit card through the setup here, does it also, are you getting like a double payment if it's coming out of a bank account that you're paying? Like, does it show up as a double payment?
So if you have auto pay turned on, is that what you mean? Like you have an auto pay?
Right.
For-
So, or let's say, okay, so you have your credit card account set up, right, to pay for, so the invoice comes in from the credit card and you have a bunch of things on that credit card, like for office expense and travel expense and stuff like that. Okay, so when you go into that credit card and you go to pay those different things, you hit pay credit card and you're paying with your bank account, does it end up showing like you're double paying or not?
Because the offset is to reduce the liability in your credit card account that's on your chart of accounts. Right? So when you pay the credit card down, you would be able to see if you went to list and chart of accounts, and if you went to this credit card account, and I'm double clicking and that'll take me into the credit card register, you would see your charges and then you would see your payment, right? Making the liability go down. And on the payment in this credit card register, the payment, this account is going to be the offset account, and that would show as your checking account.
Okay, got it. Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just worried it would show as a double to my account. Like you have this on the credit card and also a payment in the credit card and a payment in your bank account. So it doesn't like look like a double payment.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
okay.
If we went into the register, right, you're going to see it twice because there are two accounts involved in this payment transaction, just like there always are, right? That dual entry accounting system. So the liability of the credit card is impacted. And then you'll see that same transaction in your register, but the opposite is going to be the credit card. So you'll see it in two accounts, but it's only one transaction.
Okay.
It's just like if you generate an invoice and your accrual, you're going to see two entries for that one transaction. One is going to be on to your P&L if you're accrual, right? To whatever items you use on that invoice, to whatever income accounts those items point to. But then you're also going to see an entry on your balance sheet in accounts receivable because that person owes you that money.
Correct. Yeah. I get
Okay.
that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I'm just going to go on here. My last example for today is on page 19, and it's just paying something with petty cash, which may be another method of payment that you have. So sometimes we have an account called petty cash. It's a bank type of an account. And this is money that you have on hand to pay for those, instant things that you may need to pay for. I'm going to double click to open up the register for this bank type of an account. So how I funded petty cash is I just did a transfer, right? So, you go to the bank and you get a withdrawal of $150 because you want to put it into petty cash, right? So that's simply a transfer from one account to another, right? It's debiting checking, and it's going to put a credit of that $150 into, your jar or wherever you keep it. And so, for example, let's say I'm buying, pizza for an office party and it's $25, and then I'm going to have to expense that. And I'm just going to say it is for, let's say it was for, because we were in a training and we were buying lunch. Remember to open up your splits so that you can class that transaction. So that's another way we sometimes have, a little bit of money going out just for that quick cash stuff that you might need. And so remember to keep your receipts for that, right? So that you have a tally, and it's good practice to go through, and we can do that also through reconciliation, since this is a bank type of an account. So you want to count, right? Have an ending balance of what your kitty is in terms of your petty cash. And you can reconcile that in QuickBooks. You can print the report, right? So that you can show that you balance to the receipt book and the actual receipts that you have for petty cash. And I realize not everybody will do petty cash, but I'm sure some of you probably do, especially, maybe in more remote areas. But petty cash is just set up as a regular bank type of an account. So we have 11:32, and based on what Heidi and I proposed in terms of our block of time, we wanted to make sure that we saved between 20 and 30 minutes for questions about the content. Or just as we discussed yesterday, opening it up for discussion. We talked about that today too, in terms of best practices. So I am finished with my content for today. And so it would be time to open it up for questions.
I don't see any specifically in the chat box, Allison. So if any, oh, Becky, she has a question. So if you have a question, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it, please.
Hi, I'd like to go back to the paying bills topic. I currently, like everybody else, I'm sure, have taken over using QuickBooks from somebody else's prior work. And I have a list of about 12 bills that are sitting in my queue that I don't know. I mean, some of them are really, really old from 2015. They're not current bills that I need to be paid. So I would like to delete them somehow, if that's possible.
So I'll just go here, and I'm just going to go back. So let's say it's this bill. And it's really old. And probably, I guess the research that I would recommend before you delete the bill, you know, it sounds like it's a mistake, right? That somebody probably wrote a check to pay for this. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
They didn't use pay bills, and that's why it's still open in your accounts payable.
Okay, yes.
So we can delete transactions and they will be deleted, right? That's because it was a mistake. So that's the button right here, is to delete.
Okay. So I'm on looking at my whole list of bills here. So like back a level from here. Like I guess I don't know
I
how.
had this happen too, Becky, and we actually voided ours, Allison, so it didn't delete it completely.
I was going to mention that as your other option. So we can go to the edit command, and there is an alternative, which is voiding the bill. So when you void a bill, it's still there to refer back to, and you could even memo it here, right? Paid by check number, you know, on February 2nd of 2015, whatever it is, I would memo that.
Okay, I can't even get to the bill to look at it. I'm on my list, select bills to be paid. And I'm putting my check mark in the one from 2015, right clicking and saying to find it. And it doesn't even bring anything up.
You know what I would do? You can go to reports, company and financial. I guess this is where I would start. I would go to my balance sheet standard and I would go to accounts payable.
Okay.
So you have an amount there, right?
I'm getting there.
Mhm.
Accounts payable. Yes, I do.
And you know that when you move your mouse to that accounts payable amount, you'll get that zoom lens.
Yes.
And so I can double click to get into the list of those outstanding accounts payable.
Okay. Okay. I don't know, this is a mess. It brought me to a list that's like hundreds of transactions long. Maybe I just need to play with it.
Okay. You know, tomorrow, what we're going to get into more is a filtered list. You could filter, but you could also run a different report. So you could go to reports, vendors, and payables, and you could actually go to an unpaid bills detail report. So that should just be the unpaid bills.
Okay, yes. Yes, this is perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure how many, it sounded like maybe enter bills was an old process and you weren't using it anymore. But this would be a detailed list of the unpaid bills. And again, so you should be able to zoom in to each one of those individual forms. Just like I did.
Okay, perfect. I'll play around with this and ask more questions tomorrow if I need to. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Other questions? Heidi, do you want to open this up for discussion about topics?
Yeah, is there anything anyone thought of that came up today? It's okay if it doesn't happen either. This is a lot of information for sure. And I feel like I have personally been looking through it and being like, oh my gosh, now I need to do this and now I need to do that. And so I'm like making this personal list of things I need to do. And it's hard to ask questions right now. But yeah, I don't know if we have any other discussion, which is also fine, you know? Do you have anything else you'd like to go over, Allison, or do we get out of class just a little early today?
I guess we got out of class a little bit early today.
Hey, that's one of my favorite things. Not that I don't love class. Uh, Wonderful. Well,
So I would
again,
like
Allison, thank
feedback.
you.
I certainly would like feedback about, if you learned anything today, if it was helpful to you. As we move forward with this, I would love to make it even more targeted to what your needs are. So please feel free to let me know how things are going.
I did also send you an email with that chart of accounts from Chris Evans, Allison, just so you know. So you have
Is
that.
okay. You did it just this morning?
Yep.
Okay.
We're getting a lot of thank you. This is super helpful in the chat box.
Well, I'm here till
Yeah.
noon, so I could just sit here and wait for questions.
That's awesome.
If
Uh,
if pe-
yeah, I think that just might be it for today.
all righty.
So we'll see everyone back here at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and we'll do it for one more day. And then, like I mentioned, if everybody could plan to just stay for a couple extra minutes so Katie could talk about SWOT a little. We just have a lot of really good folks on this call, so
Perfect. Yeah,
I
I
would
bet.
like to take advantage of it. Oh, we got good presentation, lots of good info. 2 hours is perfect for my attention span,
Right.
which I
Yeah.
agree.
I try
Yeah.
to limit it to an hour and a half or up to 2. Zoom, it's just a little bit harder, right? And so, Heidi, do you have any feedback for me as people are leaving the session?
I just think you're doing a great job, and we really do appreciate it. I think that it'll be fun to plan an in-person training later on
Right.
so we can come together and really discuss things face to face, because it is a little bit easier, obviously, to have conversations face to face. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you
Super.
so much, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time, everybody. Appreciate it. I'll see you in the morning and for our last wrap-up session. So see you then. Have a good day. Enjoy the weather. It's beautiful here in Big Fork anyway. Hopefully it's beautiful all across the state.
Thanks, Allison.
Okay, great.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.